Hey everybody, Tom Barnes stories from the 78. And it's not often I get to talk to people that are from my neck of the woods because it's such an unique place to grow up for 100 different reasons. But the southwest side is Chicago. But I have my friend Emily Bleeker here. How are you, Emily?
Hey, I'm doing great.
So let's get that out of the way first because I was a Stag Charger and you were a
Sandberg Eagle.
Sam. That's right. You guys are the Eagles.
We're the Eagles.
So and you've written 7 novels, and they've gone out to millions of people that have read these novels that you have. And the newest one that you have, "When We Chase the Light," which is right there in that background of your video there, has to do with all things like World War II era, golden age of Hollywood, right?
Yeah, it's actually 6 decades, which was just a bright idea on my part to be like, hey, let's go through 6 whole decades. But yes, it starts out in World War II and then some golden age of Hollywood and then kind of meanders through the 60s and 70s, a little bit of 80s, tiny bit of 90s. We'll get it all.
So what made you want to start back in the World War II era?
So this is a companion book to a book that came out last year from that I wrote when we were enemies.
Hmm.
And that one was about POW camps on American soil for Italian POWs. And so this kind of jumps off right after Italy switches sides.
Ah.
So in World War II, Italy switches sides from the axis of evil to the Allies, and then at that time, all of the POWs are given the option to either switch sides also or stay loyal and stay in jail, basically. And anybody who switched, which was really like 90% of the prisoners, then became a part of the Italian service unit.
Hmm.
And then they were shipped mostly to Boston, but all over the place and worked to build ships all around for the U.S. Army.
Yeah, I know. World War II is just so fascinating on so many levels. Just how everything came together, how we won, and I mean we, not just the United States, but the Allied forces, right? The world. But gosh, there are so many stories intertwined. So I imagine that is a great canvas to then weave in a story that you want to come up with. And if I may ask, what years did you attend the old Sandburg High School?
Uh, I graduated in 98. So
98. Oh, so did I. We're the same age. Look at that.
oh my gosh,
Uh,
look at
wow,
that.
rivals.
But we go
Okay.
to the same people.
We probably do, which is another weird thing. And okay, well, it's another podcast for another day. But I imagine, though, that when you were in high school at Sandburg, that history fascinated you.
Yes, I actually minored in history.
Hmm.
I just when I was a little kid, when people would ask what I wanted to be, I would say I wanted to be a paleontologist, archaeologist, or an Egyptologist. And so
Oh,
I
yeah.
think that really what it was is I just liked digging into history. And I liked imagining what people's lives were like back then, which actually has really worked out for me because now I get to study and research, but then also make up what I think happened in people's lives back then based off of the research that I've done.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like I'm talking to like a best friend of mine that has the same interests as I do, just because I too am very much that way. I wasn't always that way in my stag years or even early college years. I more or less wanted just to be in the music industry. But as I've gotten a little older, I've always been fascinated with Chicago's history just because, you grow up and I'm sure you had relatives and grandparents or whoever that were like, oh, they're from that neighborhood or that, that parish if they're on the south side or what have you. And you hear about all these different restaurants or neighborhoods that had this, had a Woolworths in it. What's a Woolworths? You go into that, so
Right.
on and so forth. And I always wondered why things were the way they were. And Chicago's a great backdrop just for that little piece of what it is, like world history, like what happened here, why certain things, started here, and a lot of it is because of the transportation and all that good stuff. But man, oh man, like Chicago is such a great way to do that and to fall in love with history because now as an older adult, I live in a house that's like 100 years old. So that to me is really cool. And I always want to find out the history of the house, the history of the neighborhood, the whole thing. So I can definitely sympathize. And I imagine it's an endless curiosity for you.
It is. And it always has been. And I never thought that it would be something that I would take into a career, but it's just something that's always just been curiosity based. And sometimes I'm like, does this mean I'm like a gossip and I just want to know all the good stuff? But I do. Anywhere I go, I want to hear people's stories. I want to hear their family stories. I want to dig deeper into the history of something. I'm sure I drive my family crazy with it, but I think even if I wasn't writing books, I would just want to know those things. I don't know. It makes me feel good to know that we come from someplace,
Well,
that that everybody lived a life just like we're living now in their own time and setting. And there's something connecting about that.
oh, absolutely. As I recently was married, and my grandparents, who have are both gone, and my grandfather when I was really young, for some reason have a huge impact on my life. Even though he was gone when I was 6, and my grandmother, she passed when I was like 40, so I had her for a long time. But their story is so fascinating to me. How they met, World War II, like they met, and then he went off to fight for 4 years, and she didn't see him. You know what I mean? And
Right.
like that really interests me as I got older, as Veterans Day would come around, or Memorial Day, or Fourth of July. I really dug into it, whereas which is why I started this whole entire website podcast thing of stories from the 78, because of the different stories out of Chicago and the surrounding areas. So I don't sympathize. I'm very excited to meet somebody, clearly, because I'm jabbing away here, about just finding great stories about history. And I have fortunate to go to like different parts of the city on a daily basis. And going, I was just in South Shore neighborhood. Have you ever been to South Shore neighborhood?
I am so terrible with knowing what neighborhood is what neighborhood. So maybe I just dropped my son off at UIC. So we were in on Taylor Street in Little Italy very
Got it. Got it.
recently.
Well, further south is South Shore, right on the
Okay.
lakefront, kind of where Chicago ends and Indiana begins.
Oh, okay.
Lots of history there, a lot of steel mill
Yeah.
history. So getting into all that, I imagine when you were thinking of these different stories that you write, you think of things that pop in your head, perhaps like World War II, where then you want to dig a little bit about the people that were around. And you mentioned that, but I know that you, for this book specifically, you went to what was it, a base or a camp in
Yes.
Indiana to
Yeah,
learn.
the
Explain that story.
Scatterberry. Yeah, yeah. So I wanted to go to a real POW camp
Hmm.
that I could go and explore, that I could learn more about, and that's really important for my process is to, as much as possible, be able to actually visit the places that I'm writing about. And so Camp Atterbury is very fascinating to me because they still have the chapel there that was built by the Italian POWs that
Oh, wow.
because the Geneva Convention allowed that anybody could celebrate their own religious affiliation wherever they were.
Hmm.
And so part of that was that these men were extremely Catholic. And so they wanted to build their own chapel in the prison. And that was allowed according to the Geneva Conventions. So they got together a team and they built a chapel there, and the chapel is still there. So I was able to go visit that chapel. It's tiny, it's smaller than my office. It's really just an altar, and then they would have the services outside.
Hmm.
And then there was a museum there as well that told the history of Camp Atterbury and the POW camps there.
And so you use some of the stories that you heard as like inspiration for the book, or do you actually use real, like kind of like Devil in the White City, use a lot of real events of like the Chicago World's Fair to interweave with this crazy psycho killer story? Did you do something in that similar writing style where you took stuff like that and made this whole little recipe that is your book?
Well, I did put in some of the specific details, like the specific stoneworker
Hmm.
who was accredited for doing some of the carvings. I had him in the book. So I used the dates that are specific to because the chapel being built is a big part of the story. The former story, the When We Chase the Light, starts right as that chapel's being dedicated.
Got it.
So all of those dates are completely accurate. Like even they had a beautiful picture of the day that they dedicated that chapel, and so that's really what I used to start off this book was that moment where they were all gathered around this chapel. So it really was inspirational.
How do you go about just getting, I imagine you find so much information that it could be like almost overwhelming where you're like, okay, now I have all this stuff. How do I pare it down into a concise message that will be my book?
There are two things that I do. First of all, sometimes my research inspires me, and sometimes I go and seek out my research. So I can be inspired with an idea from some sort of research or reading or viewing, or my grandmother was the one who inspired me about the POW camps. So my dad told me, "Oh, your grandmother used to work at an Italian POW camp and fell in love with an Italian priest there, and they stayed in touch the rest of his life." And I was like, I have so many questions
Yeah, what?
about that
That's not
whole.
something you bring up over Thanksgiving dinner.
I know. And he insists it was a platonic love, like he would draw her postcards and send them to her occasionally. And this book has postcards in it, and that was based off of that story. The Italian POW camp was based off of that
That's
story.
great.
So all of those things came from this one-off comment that my dad made about my grandmother working in a POW camp during World War II. So that inspired the story. But then while I'm writing, whenever I come to something that I know I need to know something specific of, I leave a placeholder there, and I know I need to go back and dig further in. So that kind of organizes me
Mhm.
so that I can go back and say, these are the specific things that I really need to know. And then I can go and dig in further and find out what those are.
So what's the whole process like, from that conversation till, you get the green light of the manuscript that will become your book?
Oh gosh, a lot long. Because that comment was made to me before I was even a writer. Like I had no
Oh,
idea I would ever write when my dad made that comment. And we were actually driving to my grandmother's funeral. And we drove past an exit, and he said, "That's where your grandmother used to work at the POW camp." And I asked lots of questions, but it was just a story that I thought I'll tell my kids one day. And then it just kind of stuck with me. And what happens with me is I always have a couple of stories that are playing around inside of my head
hmm.
and that start to grow and develop and form. And then at some point, I'm like, I think I want to write this down. I want to write down this idea. And so then I write down the idea, then I write down maybe a synopsis, and then maybe I dare to bring it up to like my agent or whatever.
Hmm.
And so then after you get all of that together, that's when you go to your publisher if you have an established relationship.
Sure, sure.
And then you present a pitch, which is like 50 pages of your book plus a full synopsis and plus a pitch, which reads like the back of a book, like a blurb. So, and then that's when you get started on the actual like, this is going to be a book one day.
Ah, see. That's a daunting task, I bet, just to gather all the information and then to not forget something. Like I always, will do something and it comes out great. And then you look at some notes, you're like, I totally forgot to put that thing in there. How did I forget to put that one thing in there? That's the one thing, the reason why I did it. And now that happens to me. That's why I'm not a writer yet. I'm working on it, but not yet. I'll do this for now. But I figured I'd just talk about things on video so I don't have to go back through my notes. I can just go back through video. But um,
But
yeah,
that's the nice thing about writing. It's what I like about writing. And, because I perform, I'm an actor. I go on stage and do things. I also sing. Those things you have to be good at in that one moment in time. You have to like prepare and then go on stage and be like, look, I'm good at this. But with writing, you don't have to. You can work on it, and you go through and you do multiple drafts. You go through and have other people look at it and give you feedback. You are working on this living document for over a year,
hmm.
usually, between you and your editor, yourself writing. And so I think that's a really comforting thing for me, where I'm like, all right, now I can really dig in and try and figure out where I can make this better, where this makes more sense. So if you do forget something, you get to go back and, take it out, put something else in, whatever you need to do, move it around.
Sounds like a true Renaissance woman. You have you act, you sing, you write. Is there something that you don't do? Is this like, where did all this come from?
Math. I don't do
I
math.
don't do math
There
either.
you
Yeah.
go. Okay. Solidarity there. No, I don't. I think that there's always been an interest for me in theater since I was young. I took a many, many years break from going on stage until about 6 or 7 years ago when I started taking improv classes.
Oh yeah.
And so, and then I ended up auditioning for the house team, and I've been on the house team at the theater in Libertyville since then. So,
Very cool. And where can people find more information about you? I know the book comes out October 22nd. Is that correct?
it does. It comes out October 22nd. You can find out information about me and about the book at emilybleeker.com, or I am Emily Bleeker on all social media. So if you want like just updates, go to Facebook. If you want weird stuff, go to TikTok.
What's I'm sorry. What's weird stuff?
I don't know. I just, it's TikTok.
So some of your dancing or singing when you're into your theatrical
Unfortunately,
performances?
I have not graduated to dancing and singing yet.
Okay, fair enough. So before I let you go, since you are a fellow Southsider, one
Yes.
thing that you, because you now are on the very opposite end of the Chicagoland area, up there in the Grays Lake area. So, what do you remember most about growing up on the South side there, Southwest side, or what's one of your favorite things that you used to do?
Oh gosh, I was such a nerd though. Like I was not a cool kid. Here is the craziest thing I ever did. Are you
Okay.
ready for
Yeah,
this?
yeah, yeah.
It was after homecoming. We went down the street. I don't even remember the forest preserve, but it's down the street from Sandburg. Got a whole bag of gumballs. And then we saw who could chew the most gumballs at the same time. That's how cool I was.
That was homecoming, you said?
That was homecoming.
Hey, you
That
know what? It's homecoming season. It's appropriate story, apropos.
Go chew some gumballs. But
I
yes.
imagine you hit up the plush horse once in a while.
Oh yeah, definitely
Yeah,
the
yeah.
plush horse. Love the plush horse. Yeah, we had our prom. My senior prom was downtown at Union Station.
Oh, cool. Ours was at the Grand Ballroom at Navy Pier.
Nice. Hey,
Yeah,
we knew how to do it,
we
right?
sure do. Emily, it's been such a pleasure talking to you and catching up with somebody from my neck of the woods. It doesn't happen too often. So when I do, I kind of nerd out a little bit. So I apologize. But congratulations on the seventh book. October 22nd, it comes out, and people can find it. Can they purchase from your website, or should they go to other places for that?
Yeah, I go to Amazon.com is probably the easiest place. So this is When We Chase the Light. And if you also can check out When We Were Enemies, they can hold hands and be best friends.
Awesome. I like it very much. Thank you, Emily, for your time this afternoon. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you.